Hey everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of Booknerds Author Agency podcast, where we talk about books, authors, publishing, book marketing, author branding, and so much more. I'm Yash Tiwari, your host for this particular session, and to talk a little bit about myself, I'm a global youth mentor and international award winning and best selling author of multiple books, including The Mindful Revival Habits for a Lasting Change in 50 Days, published by Hay House India, and also one of the first fiction novels on the COVID 19 outbreak called Pandemic 2020. Today, we are going to be talking about a very exciting subject matter, and for that, I would like to start the session today, which is actually going to be all about a topic that many of the youngsters, especially, are more and more inclined to learn about. As a youngster myself, I'm always very eager to discuss more about it and to learn more about it from experts, such as the expert that we have on board for today. But before we start with that much awaited interaction, I'm reminded of a quote that I would like to share with all of you, which was spoken by John C. Maxwell, who once rightly remarked that a leader is the one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. And this is precisely what we are going to be discussing about in today's session, that is going to be all about leadership and what it truly means. For that, we have a very inspiring personality with us, the author of the new book, Leadership Unmasked, Marut Bhardwaj. Maruji, I'm so happy to have you on board. And before I even start introducing you, I would like to know a little bit about, how you are feeling to be discussing of this book over here in the session today.
It's amazing. Thank you, Yash. And it's great to know about your wonderful accomplishments before I get started about mine. And I'm based out of Gurgaon, and really, this is an opportunity for me to talk to people all across through your podcast and let them know about this book that I have written. And really, for me, it's a labor of love because I spent many years working with globally with many leaders, and I really experienced that they were stressed, that they were burning out, they were confused, and they were wearing masks because they could not let any of that show or discuss it with any of their colleagues or peers or even team members. And so it was challenging for them, and the more stressed and unable to talk they were, the harder it was for them to keep the mask on. So that is what led me to write this book, because I think every leader today is looking for a direction that will lead them into a more calm and clear mind when they are trying to lead their teams. So very happy to
That
be here today.
that is so wonderful, ma'am, and I'm very happy and in fact honored to be interacting with you. I just have one request: if you could kindly show a copy of your book to our viewers as well right now, that would be great.
Very happy to
Ah,
do that.
such a
Please
wonderful
do look
cover.
for it in Amazon. Yes. Thank
Absolutely,
you.
absolutely. I'm sure that even right now, when we are having this conversation, many of the aspiring readers out there are already booking their copies on Amazon. So, let's await their reviews as well. But for now, in this conversation, for all those who are for the very first time joining our podcast as listeners or viewers, I would like to share a bit about Maruji. So, Marut Bharadwaj is a leadership expert who believes in extraordinary power of human spirit. She has coach and she as a mentor has guided leaders for over 30 years with courage, compassion and confidence. And her latest book, Leadership Unmasked, is not just yet another self-help book on the shelves of the bookstores, but it is a revolution and a revelation of what being a leader in the modern world truly means. And so on that note, ma'am, I would like to ask that I would say the very first sentence, if I'm not mistaken, of your book is about that the fact that leadership has been long wrapped in myth, cloaked in power, and measured by titles, strategies, and performance metrics. It lands like a true lighting bolt, especially for anyone who is leading about a subject like this for the very first time. And I love to read books, especially self help books, but this was one quote which truly struck me. So, what personal moment for you personally shattered those myths, especially around leadership that we usually encounter these days, and showed that leadership is about being and not just commanding with words? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, sure. You see, these things don't come in a mass, in a big way. There are these little moments where you begin to realize what is really happening here. And although you see a CEO who's struggling with a spreadsheet and then takes a pause, takes a break, and suddenly you can see that clarity of his or her mind, and that strikes you that the pause is what helped them find that calm and clarity which helped them to handle the challenge better. Sometimes you see a leader letting go of personal benefits for the well-being of their team. So these are moments that really help you to connect with the fact that leadership is not about the power, the position, the strategies, or the bottom lines. Leadership is also about creating wonderful leaders in from your team, from your employees. So, looking at it from that perspective, although there have been many little moments which have inspired me to write this book, but there was a moment when I had a team of wonderful folks working with me in the creative side of business, and I just wanted to create a happy, comfortable moment for everyone, bring them together, have some bonding happening. And I asked them a simple question. Let's think about this one very happy moment in our life, the happiest ever. That one moment where I was just so joyful, and I can still think back and remember those wonderful moments. And I invited everyone, and you would understand this because I have a deep mindfulness practice, and a lot of my work is inspired by that. I'm saying this because Yash's book talks about mindfulness as well. So yeah, so I asked them all to close their eyes and spend some time grounding themselves and moving inwards with their attention. And I asked them to look for this really happy moment in their past, relive that in their mind's eye, and then when they're comfortable, open their eyes and share with everyone. So it was just a simple game, basically intended to create some joy in the team. But what happened was close to shocking for me, because each and every member in the team, when their turn came to share, not only shared a poignant, very touching moment in their life, but practically all of them cried when they did that. So we were talking about a happy moment, but just that fact of being allowed to open up their emotions and express what is closest to their heart allowed them, or gave them the permission to express their emotions openly, honestly, with their teams. And what happened as a result is that we developed deep trust in the team. And that was a moment when I realized that, it started as a fun exercise, but it ended up being a deep, really trust creating, psychological safety creating moment for all of us. And
Yeah.
so I understood that these moments are what leadership is all about. It is about presence, it is about purpose, it is not really about podiums and positions. So yeah.
Yes, that is so beautifully said, ma'am, I have to say. And I always feel that a major myth that especially the youngsters today are encountering when it comes to subjects like leadership or just being in a position where you are commanding others is that being in a commanding position is all about dominance, or it is all about the loudest of voices, which in my personal experience is not true. I might have the most soft spoken voice in a room filled with people, but what I will be speaking would be so insightful that it would create an impact. And that is what personally I think defines leadership or any sort of a commanding position far better than shouting or screaming and thinking that you are just on the podium, as you said, and you have a mic in your hand. So that means that all the spotlights on you, which in reality the spotlights are all about the vision that people have about you, even more than the actual lights that are focused on you. So do you agree with that sentiment?
Absolutely, that is true. That is true. See, leadership, I like to describe it like this. There was a time when leadership was about being a hero,
Yeah.
leading from the front, as they said. The image that would come to mind if you were to visualize a hero is the white horse, the prince, in that shining armor and leading from the
Yeah.
front, and everybody following. So that was the image that you had of a hero leader. Times changed, and people started to understand the need for equality, for inclusion, and as we what should I say, evolved as corporate executives, we understood the need for leadership to be more central to the team and not trying to be the hero in the process. And then the sense of leadership was more about a circle of employees and the leader standing right in the middle and being very much a part of that cohort, and together they move forward. And then came the pandemic, and a lot changed because of that, right? Especially Gen Z and the youngsters, they faced very extreme situations, a lot of tragedy, a lot of uncertainty, grief, trauma. There was a lot to handle. And in the midst of this, the leaders were trying to persevere and find a way to continue to keep the work happening, the goals being achieved, and so on. And so it was a strange time for all of us with no precedences to fall back on. And at that time, a lot of research conducted says that people felt not valued, people felt not seen, people felt that their managers and leaders were not really recognizing the level of or the extreme of grief and trauma that they were handling, and the amount of stress and anxiety that they were going through. There was a lot of concern around mental health and well-being, and what role does the organization play to ensure the betterment of the employees in the process, and so on. So at that time, a completely new approach to leadership emerged. And there were some leaders who were compassionate enough and empathetic enough to understand and connect with the grief and the trauma that people were going through, to support them in those times. And that is when, if you were to visualize the leadership at that point, it completely changed, even from the middle of the team to someone who's right at the bottom, supporting the team as the team moves forward. So it's not about me as a leader front ending and showcasing how wonderful we are, but creating that support where every leader in the team emerges. Right. So that's the kind of leadership that is now today being appreciated by team members. As a matter of fact, I was earlier working with an organization called Potential Project, which conducted a research to understand, do people, and this is because a lot of leaders express that, if I was to become more empathetic and compassionate, will I become kind of like a pushover, because people respect me enough then, because I'm so easy approachable and all of that. And so they conducted this research to understand if a leader is very, very performance oriented, goal oriented, data driven, logical. How do the parameters in an organization full of team members get impacted in terms of, the loyalty towards their leader, job satisfaction, performance levels, and so on. And if the leader is very compassionate, very kind, very people oriented, then what happens? And if a leader is balanced, so the leader is able to find the right balance between care and performance. So they care for people, they ensure that people are valued and taken care of, but at the same time, they don't forget, and they're wise enough to understand that we are here together in the organization because there are goals to be achieved. So while they take care of people, they also ensure that everybody brings their best selves and their strengths together to achieve the results that they're looking for. So the research led to some shocking results, where they found that if X is the result in terms of loyalty and job performance and the engagement levels and so on, for leaders who are very goal oriented. And what they found was that for leaders who were very people oriented, the results were just slightly different, slightly 1920 kind of results. But if the leader had the right balance between care and performance, the results went 2 to 3 times. So 2x to 3x was the result. So the invitation here is for the leaders to understand that if you are recognizing yourself as a human being as you lead your team, if you are recognizing the team members that you are leading as human beings, full of emotions, patterns, triggers, baggages, grief, trauma, difficulties, challenges, uncertainties, if you recognize that, you're much more realistic, you're much more appreciated, and employees are willing to then go above and beyond their call of duty to support the organization in that process.
That's so insightful, I have to say. And there was a lot to unpack. I am going to be rewatching the clip of your answer again and again. Trust me when I say this, because there was so many insightful points to remember, and they apply, I would say, not just in regards to leadership, but across various avenues of life. That today we live in a world where vulnerability is not just a sign of weakness, or rather, being open about your vulnerabilities or your niceness is not a sign of weakness. It is just a sign that you are a living and breathing human being. And chances are that as a living and breathing human being, you might lead other living and breathing human beings much better. And on that note, however, there is a very opposite end of a spectrum which I am thinking about, that I would like to ask a question of. Because
So,
in Leadership Unmasked, you stress that niceness and this vulnerability, it only works when it is fused with accountability, echoing Indra Nui's mix of empathy and tough calls at PepsiCo. So, could you share a time from, let's say, your coaching practices or your mentorship practices when this tougher brand of kindness changed a team's trajectory, and how leaders can bake that habit into everyday behaviors of leading their teams or employees?
yeah, one of the most impactful situations that I was a part of with a client when I was working earlier as a facilitator was when that organization, and it's a large global organization that I'm talking about, uh, they were going through continuous change for years at a stretch. People's nerves were at the end. They were just so exhausted, drained from
Yeah.
trying to adjust to the changes that they had to go through, the uncertainties that they had to handle. And in that scenario, they were going through some tough times because the newest CEO was now asking for a super focused performance culture. And as an organization or as a culture, they had always been nice, as you said. So nice is something that had been developed carefully over years and decades so that everybody was happy and there was a sense of joy in the organization. So in this organization, when we would facilitate, we would realize the tension that people were in, and the kind of stress that they were dealing with at all times. So, when the CEO insisted on that performance culture, it became critical that the feedback was given at the right time, that every individual was performing towards the goals that had been set and achieving their KRAs and so on. And in that environment, they wanted to conduct facilitation sessions to sort of prepare everyone for high quality feedback conversations. Now, there were two elements at work here. One was that the leaders who were going to do these feedback conversations were absolutely uncertain whether their jobs will stay or not, whether their roles will stay or not, because there was a lot of conversation about many, many people being let go. The other part at play was that the people that they were supposed to do the feedback conversations with were extremely distraught, not willing to listen, very reactive because of the negativity and the head count being cut and so on. So there was a lot of tension in the environment. In this environment, we needed to facilitate them for being able to give good feedback conversations to their team members. It was extremely challenging because the leaders did not want to, the team members did not want to receive that conversation. Everyone was very tense and reactive to the whole situation. So, finding that right balance between recognizing the challenges that they were facing, helping them to see why those feedback conversations were critical, nevertheless, and then having the empathy, kindness, and compassion to guide them towards those conversations so that they are able to surmount those mental challenges that they were facing and face towards the future and see what are the benefits of all of these changes that they will be seeing soon. So, this was very challenging, and this was exactly what you talked about. Being nice was not enough. There had to be accountability, there had to be performance, and each individual had to be provoked into their best performance. So, best, they had to be converted into their best self by challenging them from where they were to where they could potentially be. So this was a fantastic experience that I had, especially because I was the engagement lead for that client. So I got to see the whole thing, being executed at a global level, see the change that it brought, and how each facilitator helped those leaders to get off that space where they were unable to connect with their team members and start to form those bonds again.
That's wonderful. And I think this harkens back to what you said in the beginning of today's session as well, that it is not just about having sort of a technical proficiency as a leader, or just having a sense of vulnerability or openness. It is about the balance of both.
Absolutely.
It is about how much you're able to balance these two components, because as a leader, you will be required to make the tough calls. But as a leader, you are also expected to understand the mistakes that your team members might make from now and
Yes.
then. So I think your answer very beautifully encapsulates that idea, and I really appreciate how you have put it for all of us. Which actually brings me to my next question, which is not about different kind of leaders that we might have, or different kind of individuals that we might have within a single corporation, but rather on a much larger scale, on a much larger spectrum. Because, as you mentioned in your book, that you have worked with leaders across New York, Switzerland, Singapore, Mumbai, and various other regions, and each with their own cultural rhythm. Now, as a communication skills trainer, what I always see is that when I'm, let's say, mentoring the youngsters of India, or when I'm mentoring the youngsters of London or any other region around the world, interestingly, their issues are pretty similar. All of them are anxious. All of them have a stage fright. All of them are worried about the judgment of others, as in log kya kahenge, but of course in their different languages or in their different avenues. But those issues are sort of similar. The way they are dealing with those issues, or the solutions, sometimes have to be drastically different, however. So,
Yeah.
were there any moments of corporate or culture shock, or any regional shocks that fundamentally reshaped how you personally understand leadership today as well, when it comes from one country to another, or maybe strategizing based on whom you are guiding and where they belong culturally or regionally?
Sure, sure. I read a book called Cues, and
Cues.
yeah,
Okay.
Cues, Cues. And
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name of the author, but it's a beautiful book which explains how all of us, when we lead and or when we facilitate or when we connect with a team, we tend to move on a spectrum between power and compassion. So, depending on your audience or depending on the people that you are connected with, you need to identify where on that spectrum you need to exist, right? So, for example, when I am facilitating, let's say Accenture or BCG or Deloitte or one of the consulting organizations, let us just use as an example, uh, they come from data, they come from logic, they come from extreme work scenarios, very competitive ways of working, strong revenue based decision making, and so on. So you need to be much more data driven when you are facilitating to them, for example. They smile lesser, they are more questioning, they are more critical, they have what can be termed as a little bit of high competence insecurity, you know. So those are because of the environment that they are a part of, they are expected to be excellent always, better than everyone else always. So that obviously puts pressure, that obviously makes them very, very logic oriented, but sometimes that is at the cost of being human. And those are situations that we saw on the negative side, I would say. But on the positive side, these organizations are the ones that are most conscious about the fact that they are missing on the human element in leadership. So the initiatives that are taken, the effort that is made to bring the human element in place is really important. As a matter of fact, the first organization that I heard talking about love in the organization was Accenture. Love for the customers and love for the team members. And they announced this as one of their key strategic initiatives for the year, I think in 2024. It meant having that compassion, having that courage, having that care, which goes beyond just the call of duty. So, not just as you are supposed to, but really genuinely, authentically connecting with the customer and with your team members to a point where you form genuine, authentic bonds, where you go. Yes, exactly. It's not an on-surface thing or, mouthing the right words, but it is more about forging deep bonds which stay beyond that project or that task that you are doing with them. So, so this was quite an eye opener for me, and so this is about different kinds of organizations. I spoke to you about the earlier company where we were doing these facilitations. There is a lot more niceness, there is a lot more joy, there is a lot more connection between people, but it was coming at the cost of performance. Now, this is the other side of the spectrum. And so, when the new CEO came, he said, I want a full on performance culture in the organization. Do ruthless prioritization, say no to everything, identify your top three priorities, and just say no to everything else. I will only judge your performance based on your top three priorities that you are bringing to the table. So this is where there was a huge advent on the performance side of things. So this is a difference that I noticed. Then geographically, if we talk, again, there is a big difference. If you talk about Europe and US, uh, and I like to say that India is sort of 10 years behind, but after 10 years we catch up and become exactly like what's happening in the West. So today they recognize that there is a need for the human element, but at the same time they are very clear and very concise about what is expected, and do not allow too many emotions to be a part of their way of leading. So, in that sense, on the West side of the world, there is more of a struggle to entirely bring out the emotions and the human side as a leader. Compared to that, on the Asia side, you will find that it is easier for everyone to express their emotions. There is more of an emotional expression than on the West. So that is on the geographic side. As a matter of fact, I had a very interesting experience in Singapore where I was facilitating with a few other co-facilitators, and we were working with a large team of around 250 senior leaders of an insurance company in Singapore. And we had this very straight-faced, senior executives listening to the facilitator who was explaining compassion and focus and so on. And in the middle of an exercise that they were doing, suddenly the facilitator, one of the local facilitators, climbed a dais, stood on the top, and started talking to them in their proper local dialect, Singaporean local dialect, and that is very different from the tone and style of speaking English. And suddenly, you could see the smiles erupt on all the faces, although to us it looked really out of the place. And for a moment, I felt a sense of panic. Are we supposed to do this? Is it okay to
It's
really provoke?
disarming. It's
Yeah,
disarming.
but it was beautiful the way it bonded everyone, and
Yeah,
suddenly that whole tightness just left everyone, and everyone became more open and more connected and more bonded. And so that
yeah,
was beautiful. And since these cultural jolts remind me that leadership language is universal. You have your own tones and styles,
yeah.
but eventually the language is universal. It may be tuned to the local rhythms of respect and relationship and ritual, but eventually it is about courage, connection, and care.
That is so wonderfully said. But this leads to an additional question, a follow up question, which is coming up in my mind. What do you think is one great obstacle, or I wouldn't even call it as an external obstacle, but rather a psychological, internal obstacle or concern that the aspiring leaders of today, whether they belong in India or they belong in the US or they belong in Europe, are facing, according to you? something that they are just not certain about, and yet they want a clarity of. And this seems to be a common trend across all the geographical boundaries.
That is true. I think one basic reason why there is a very high level of anxiety and stress that leaders are facing is that there is just too much uncertainty in the environment, in the market, in the world overall, in general, in the political scenario. So, all of that really brings an extreme level of anxiety and stress to the leaders. The world is not just complicated anymore, it is complex. It has moved to being complex, and so you cannot always efficiently predict what is going to come next. And therefore the expectation from the leader is to persevere and have the grit to face whatever the situation, whatever the new normal starts to show up, whether it is the pandemic or it is the war happening with Israel or Russia or India or whatever it is. They need to flex themselves on an ongoing basis. So there is really no thumb rule to leadership as such now. So what has evolved is, and this is a term that I learned at Potential Project, is what is called both and leadership. So you need to take care of people, but you also not but and you also need to ensure that you are performance oriented. You need to be realistic about what the situation is today, but you need to have the hope that there is a lot of potential in the future. You need to be compassionate about people. You need to provide as much well-being, trust, and psychological safety as you can to people, but at the same time you need to challenge them, provoke them, make sure that there is clarity in the goals, give them the performance feedback at the right way at the right time, and ensure that the organizational goals are achieved. So this is what we call the both and leadership. So that is the time that we are facing as leaders. And the leaders that are most successful are the ones, and I'm going back to mindfulness here, are the ones who understand how their mind works. Really, that is the most critical part of being a leader today, understanding how my mind works, because only 1% of my decision making is in my conscious mind. 99% is happening in the subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind is very emotions driven, entirely emotions driven, actually. As a matter of fact, leaders experience amygdala hijack because of being impacted by, the level of stress and the challenges that their team members are going on. So they need to be careful of maintaining that balance between care and performance because of that. So as I was saying, they need to understand their own mind. They need to understand what are my triggers and patterns. What is it that I get triggered by, and therefore when is it that I lose my ability to consciously take a decision but go more into the auto mode. So those are the things I feel that today's generation of leaders need to be more careful about and consciously work towards addressing these things. And then the final piece is with the media revolution and AI now and all of these things happening, everyone is very distracted. Leaders are often on their phone, have their laptops open, are partly talking to someone, partly listening to a phone call, partly trying to address an email. And the truth is, there is no such thing as multitasking. It doesn't work. So we actually do an exercise where we show them and prove to everyone that even if you are supposed to handle something as simple as 1 2 3 4 and ABCD, if you were to try and do the two things together, you will take exactly 2 times the time or more. You will make many more mistakes. You will be way more stressed. There is really no positive. So the answer lies in focus. The answer lies in managing your attention. So those are some of the things that I think today's leaders need to bring their focus to.
That's so wonderfully said. And once again, it was as insightful as all your answers have been. Which brings me to the last question that I have for you in this conversation today. In Leadership Unmasked, you describe vision as a guide, not as a rule. So, how can leaders strike a balance between an excessively hopeful or naively optimistic vision, let's say, for today, and the hard reality that today's workforce expects, or more importantly, I would say, what could be that one practice of mindfulness which you personally vouch for, that you have experienced as a great way to strike that balance, which we have been talking about again and again in this conversation today.
Yeah. So, optimism is a very interesting subject. There is a reality that we are a part of, and obviously, optimism is required when things become challenging, difficult, negative, and it is hard for us to hold on to the hope at that time. So, then at that time, again, looking at it from a both hand perspective, there is a reality that we are a part of at that time, and there is a potential that may exist or not. So, as leaders, we have the responsibility to ensure that our teams and the organization is understanding the reality for what it is. Not so, if we look at pandemic, for example, that was a great time when optimism played a big role for a lot of folks in the organizational structures. um, if we look at it at that time, a lot of people were very panicked and going through tough scenarios, but at the same time there were a lot of leaders who said sab theek hai, it's okay, इतना परेशान होने का कुछ नहीं है, because nothing happened at their home. So they felt it was a media blitz and really it was all fine. We are sitting at home, खा पी रहे हैं, छुट्टी है, everything is wonderful, and so no need to panic. Let's come back. Let's look at our goals. We can make it happen. It will. It is all about just going out there and achieving the numbers. Somebody's lost a family member. They are not even able to align themselves with that way of thinking at that time. So this is a great example of trying to understand where the naivety comes from. Now, this is a naive leader who's saying, Sab theek hai, let's just show the grit and perseverance and all will be fine. It will not be. The reality is, we are going through unbelievable levels of challenges. There is a lot of grief and trauma all around us. And there were also people like, for example, the Sikh gentleman who created these groups and had the cylinders lying on the road and saying, if you are challenged and not able to get a oxygen cylinder in the hospitals, just come to us and we will support you until you can find one. So there were people who were going to that extreme of really coming out on the road and being kind and addressing the reality for what it is. And there were people who just refused to accept the reality for what it was, and uh, just behaved like everything was normal, and that is where they were being naive. And then there were those pessimistic folks who thought that was the end of the world. बस अब तो कुछ करने का फायदा ही नहीं है, there's nothing that you can do anymore. So again, this is about both hand, this is about finding the balance, this is about recognizing the reality for what it is, and making sure that you motivate your team by helping them to see the potential of the future. And truly so, because if you see, where have we come from the pandemic? India is today a stronger economy. Each
Yeah.
one of us is now back full stream into our work, and India today stands strong from a political perspective as well. So not only did we defeat the traumas and the challenges of the pandemic time, but also we have grown from there to a higher level of stability.
Absolutely. That's so wonderfully said. And it has been a true delight to listening to each one of your answers. Each one of them so insightful and so knowledgeable, but more importantly, so impactful. Eye openers, I must say. And on that note, just to remind our viewers, our readers once again, where can they find your book, and where can they place their orders? And if once again you can show them the copy of the book as well, that will be
Yeah,
great.
sure, sure. So here is the book, Leadership Unmasked, and it's a bright book, easy to identify. I
Yeah.
have written it in a simple language. I have just created it not to give a lot of gyan and knowledge, because I know people don't have the patience or the mind share to read big, heavy, thick books. So please feel free to read a chapter or two at a time and just reflect on your situation as a leader. The book is available on Amazon.in. You just type Leadership Unmasked and you will see the book. Uh, it is also available through my website, marutbhardwaj.com. That is another place. That is a place where the readers can connect with me. I am happy to take questions or discuss anything that seems interesting or worth delving deeper into.
That's so wonderful. Thank you so much, Maruchi. And it is a humble request to all the readers over here that when you place a purchase of the book and you get a copy and you read it out, make sure to submit a review on Amazon as well. Because you might think that this is a small practice, but these reviews, these ratings help so much the authors and the writers who are pouring their life and soul in these works. So kindly make sure that you share a word or two of encouragement on Amazon reviews, and make sure to get a copy as soon as possible. Share your reviews with Maruji on her website as well. And thank you so much once again. It was such a delight to interact with you. Hope you had a good time talking with us today.
Absolutely, Yash. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.